Hey, thanks for making it to Veterans Info Tap. I'm glad you made it. Wanted to talk about the 20-year rule and the twist within it. It's not as cut and dry as you may think, and I wanted to share with you so you understand exactly how the 20-year rule works. Now, with that, let's jump into it. Before we do, though, I want to throw on a special thank you to Patricia Fontenot. Fontenot. I do the best I can, Patricia. Thank you so much for that super comment, super chat. I really do appreciate you so very much. Patricia Fontenot, or Fontenot. I'm not quite sure. Thank you so much. Phonetically works good for me, as my reading and vocabulary seem to be a little bit limited at times. But I really do appreciate you so very much. Thank you. All right, so let's jump back into this. The 20-year rule. This is a huge rule, and it does offer some very, very lucrative protection. But do you really understand how it works, is the question. Now, many people just say after 20 years, you're completely protected on that condition. Okay, that's a piece of it. So there's a twist, and that's what we want to talk about here. And I did pull up some information so I could just kind of share with you what people would read, and we'll see how good Google AI overview does with explaining the rule itself. So let's see the opening paragraph. The VA 20-year rule protects veterans' service-connected disability rating from being reduced after 20 years. The rule states that the VA cannot reduce a disability rating below its current level unless there is evidence of fraud. Okay, now, I know what they're saying here. Do you, is the question, okay? The VA 20-year rule protects veterans' service-connected disability ratings from being reduced after 20 years, okay? What they are not saying is you're rated after 20 years, you're just automatically protected. It sounds like that, but that is not always the case. They are talking about two things at once here. They're talking about the condition that you're rated for and the percentage. Both of those, which, I mean, without the diagnosis and the service connection for the condition, you wouldn't have a percentage. So it's really the percentage that they're talking about. Once your percentage has been in place for 20 years. In some cases, sure, your rating for that condition and the percentage of X remain the same for 20 years. Cool. You are taken care of. But like any good veteran out there, you are looking for an opportunity for an increase. So here's the example. You filed for migraines, we'll just say. We'll use that. It's an easy one. So you filed for migraines and you got a 10% rating. Well, 10 years goes by and your migraines have gotten worse, and you talked to a couple people, you watched a couple videos, and you realized, wow, I should be rated at 30% for these migraines, or maybe even 50, but we'll use 30. So 30%. So you file for your increase, and guess what? The VA concurs. Yeah, you should be at 30%. And they change your rating to 30%. That's great. 10 more years goes by. Now you've been rated for migraines for 20 years. Awesome. Does the 20-year rule apply? Sure, but not at that current rating. Not at 30%. Your 30% is not protected under the 20-year rule. Your 10% rating that you've had from the very beginning, that you have been rated at least 10% for 20 years, that is protected. Now, you've had that 30% rating for 10 years. In 10 more years, you will have 20 years of 30%. Great. Now that's protected once you have that 20 years of that 30% rating. Then that will be protected. Now, let's throw in, well, you filed for another increase and now you're at 50%. Well, that 50% rating needs to be in place for 20 years before it is protected under the 20-year rule. So, with the idea of looking at this through the lens of percentage for your rating, not necessarily the condition, right? The percentage, your percentage is getting protected. Let's read this again with that idea that they're talking about the percentage of your rating. The VA 20-year rule protects veterans' service-connected disability ratings, the percentage, from being reduced after 20 years. Now that makes sense. They're talking about your rating percentage being reduced after 20 years. It's protected after that 20-year mark. All right, so let's move on and just kind of read through the rest of this to see what Google AI has to say, and we'll decipher if we need to add anything. The rule states that the VA cannot reduce a disability rating, the percentage, below its current level unless there is evidence of fraud. So they're talking about, again, after 20 years, they cannot reduce your disability rating after it's been in place for 20 years, unless, of course, there was fraud. All right. There's 4 bullet points here, and it says how the rule works. 4 bullet points. A veteran's disability rating is considered continuous if it has been in place for 20 years or more. Again, they're talking about the percentage, the disability percentage, not the rating of that condition that it's been rated. They're talking about the percentage that you are rated. The VA cannot reduce a continuous rating below the original rating level. That's a little bit, ambiguous the way they wrote that. What they're saying is that if you've been rated, in the example of the migraines, 10%, and then you had an increase 10 years in to 30, then you hit the 20-year mark, this is where this sentence comes into play. The VA cannot reduce the continuous rating below the original rating level. So what they're saying is that the level that's been in place for at least 20 years, even if you've had multiple increases, they're talking about the 20 years of being at least X amount. All right, the next one here, next bullet. The lowest disability rating a veteran had during the 20-year period becomes the minimum amount the VA must use to allocate benefits. So now they're being very clear here. Essentially that same example that I gave, you were 10% for 10 years, then you were 30% for the next 10. You've been rated for 20 years, but 10% has been at least for that 20-year period. So the lowest disability rating in this example is 10% that the veteran had during the 20-year period becomes the minimum amount the VA must use to allocate benefits. Last bullet. The rule protects veterans even if their rating was erroneously assigned. This is an interesting piece, and this is true, and I've heard it directly from the VA in my years of being an accredited veteran service officer. If the VA screwed up and somehow gave you some rating that you weren't even supposed to get, you filed for some back conditions and somehow they rated you for your back, but then they also gave you some sort of a knee condition and they rated you for that, and you never took the time to look or care or what have you, and 20 years goes by, and then you realize, wow, why do I have this knee condition that I don't have that's rated with the VA? Well, the VA screwed up and gave you they fat-fingered something and gave you some sort of a knee condition, or they gave you the wrong knee, or they gave you whatever. But if it was accidental on the VA side, not due to fraud, just an accidental, erroneously assigned condition with rating, if nobody does anything about it for 20 years, you get to continue to keep that condition and rating. All right, exceptions to the rule. The VA can reduce a rating if there is evidence of fraud at the time of the original rating. Another bullet here. The rule does not apply to veterans with a permanent or let's start that over. The rule does not apply to veterans with a permanent or permanent and total disability rating because it's already conceded. The rule protects veterans' benefits when they need them most, such as when they age and have to manage the effects of their conditions or disabilities. All right. So this was pulled up from a few different places. One was the CFR, the 38 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations 3.951 Bravo. It was also in the M21 and then also off of a law firm's website. That's where Google AI pulled this stuff up. And I just wanted to share it with you here today to really explain how the 20-year rule really works and the twists within it. Thanks for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. Have a great one. And remember, if we don't take care of each other, something went wrong.